Rabbi Brovender, and we're going to learn together Yitro. Yitro was the name of Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law, and the story of Yitro is told in two places in the Torah largely. One is in the parasha called Yitro, and the other is in the parasha called Ba'alotcha. When we get to Ba'alotcha, we'll talk about Yitro again, but I want to just point out that Yitro is obviously a very remarkable personality. Because the story of Yitro, his arrival in the camp of Israel and his advice that he gave to Moshe Rabbeinu is squarely placed in between Yitziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, a kind of remarkable placement. I mean, what did Yitro do exactly that got him that position of honor, where after the parasha of B'Shalach, the parasha about Yitziat Mitzrayim, the actual involvement of Bnei Yisrael in Yitziat Mitzrayim, that the people, Yitro, the story of Yitro is told. And the story of Yitro seems to be quite prosaic. I mean, he was Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law. He may have had different ideas about what was happening, and he decided to join up with Moshe Rabbeinu and Am Yisrael. But did he deserve, Yitro deserve this prominence that he has received? You know, once I taught this parasha, and I said in a kind of Hasidic manner, the parasha of Matan Torah is called Yitro. I mean, it's a pretty great honor that Yitro, I mean, he was, after all, not a Jew and not a member of the community that was accepting the Torah. And yet, the parasha is called Yitro. And I know that the parashiot are called after the name of the more impressive noun at the beginning of the first pasuk in the Torah, and Yitro comes before Moshe. But you know, the Torah, had it been interested, could have switched the words around, and it could have said Yitro. Well, Moshe, Chotein Moshe, Yitro, Shama, Uba. He didn't have to have Yitro such prominence in the pasuk. It could have had Moshe Rabbeinu prominent in the pasuk, but for some reason, the Torah wants us to put our attention to Yitro before Matan Torah, and somehow we could not understand Yitziat Mitzrayim leading to Matan Torah without Yitro. So let's see what it is that the Torah tells us about Yitro and how that is relevant to its placement in between Yitziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. Vayishma Yitro. Well, that's the beginning and the end of the story, according to Rashi. Vayishma Yitro means that Yitro heard something. But it doesn't mean that he heard something. It really means that he understood something, that he heard factual information, but he understood it and made it into something special. So let's look at the Rashi. Rashi says, Vayishma Yitro. Mashmi'ah, Shmu'ah or Shmi'ah, Shama'uba. What was it exactly that he heard, Rashi says? The Rashi says, quoting the Medrash, Rashi says, Kriyat Yamsuf u'milchemet Amalek. Kriyat Yamsuf u'milchemet Amalek. Now, what was the issue of Yitziat Mitzrayim? What was it that Bnei Yisrael found so difficult? Well, it was the matter of the Yad HaChazakah. The idea that there is only, in the league of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's only one God. That's what Yitro heard. He said, oh, Kriyat Yamsuf, That's something that could only be done by the unique God. And Milchemet Amalek, that war could only be waged by the unique God. So what it was that Bnei Yisrael had so much difficulty in understanding, Yitro did understand it. I mean, he was not part of the community. He was not the son of Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. It's all true. But he understood. Vayishma, according to Rashi, means he understood what Bnei Yisrael didn't understand. Bnei Yisrael, when they were driven out of Mitzrayim, were not happy about it. They were nervous about it. When they came to Yam Suf, they were not happy about it. They didn't know if they would be able to handle the situation. Then the Pasuk goes on and says he was Kohen Midyan, which Chazal understand as being somebody who had knowledge of theology, who was concerned about these kinds of things. Then Yitro is called again Chotein Moshe, which even on the level of our simple investigation, could mean that there was a special connection. I mean, you don't always quote your father-in-law, but sometimes you do. And if it is a person of notoriety, you might want to be called Hotain, the son-in-law of, or the father-in-law of. So he was Hotain Moshe. Not a common thing in the Tanakh, not common in the Tanakh, right? But Rashi says Hotain Moshe. See Hotain Moshe. Kan היה יתרו מתכבד במשה, that Moshe Rabbeinu, Chotein Moshe, it was an honor. It was his honor to be the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ani Chotein HaMelech, uleshavar haya Moshe toleh hagdula bechamav. Sometimes Moshe Rabbeinu thought that it was the great thing that his father-in-law was Shneimar, that quotes the pasuk Vayashev al Yeter Chotno, Vayashav. Moshe Rabbeinu went back to Yeter, his father-in-law. I mean, that's Moshe Rabbeinu, who, according to Rashi, was honored by the fact that he had this father-in-law who was so understanding, so knowledgeable, so much part of the world that Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in creating. So he says, Chotein Moshe, et kol asher asa Elohim Moshe. And again, he sees that connection, which Bnei Yisrael were not so easily able to see. There were no miracles done for Yitro. Yitro wasn't the beneficiary of the miracle as Bnei Yisrael were. They got the miracles, but he said, Kol asher asa Elohim Moshe, he understood it. He understood the relationship, that there was something special in Moshe Rabbeinu which didn't exist anyplace else, even for a person who was Kohen Midyan. Uli Yisrael Amo. Okay, first of all, calling it Amo is an important point. Ki hotzia shevet Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. So here is Yitro. He's the man who is Vayishma Yitro. He's the man of understanding. He's the person who understood, right? Who understood it. He understood what was going on. Kol asher asa, Rashi says, Lahem b'yiridat Haman. The story of the man takes place after Kriyat Yam Suf, after the splitting of the sea. Uba be'er, uba Amalek. In other words, Bnei Yisrael, he understood that Bnei Yisrael were living a magical existence. They didn't have to provide food or drink or weren't worried about wars and fighting, right? Ki hotzi Hashem, I'm sorry, et kol asher asa lahem biyiridat haman be'er uva Amalek, ki hotzi Hashem v'gomer zo gedula al kulam. That means all the miracles, all the special things that happened, but the Yetziat Mitzrayim. And this was the understanding that Yitro had about his son-in-law Moshe Rabbeinu. So in between the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, in between the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim and the story of Matan Torah, there's a little story about Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, they say, "Oh, Moshe Rabbeinu, you think he just got married? I mean, he met a girl at a well and he married her." No, he knew who he was getting involved with, because even though they were not part of Klal Yisrael, they were able to understand. Who was not able to understand? The community of Israel. They had difficulty, and the Egyptians were not understanding at all. They didn't understand a thing. But it was of such great significance that Yitro came to Bnei Yisrael in order to join in this miraculous process that was taking place right before their eyes. That was Yitro. Yitro represented the people of the world who understood, who were able to say there is something special going on. A little more about this story. Vayikach Yitro Chotein Moshe. You may have noticed Chotein Moshe, emphasis again. Chotein Moshe, not just once, but twice. Et Tzipora Eshet Moshe. Tzipora Eshet Moshe. Again, even Tzipora knows her place. She knows about Moshe Rabbeinu. She knows about what's going on. Eshet Moshe. She's Eshet Moshe. Eshet Moshe achar shilucheha. Achar shilucheha. Rashi says, achar shilucheha, kshamar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kshamar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Midyan, lech shov Mitzrayim. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to take up the challenge and to go to Mitzrayim, take the people out and bring them to Matan Torah, Vayikach Moshe et ishto ve'et banav vayetzei Aaron likrato. So Moshe Rabbeinu went, and vayivgashehu bahar ha'elokim, and he met him in the mountain, God's mountain. Amar lo mihem halalu. So he said, Moshe Rabbeinu, he said, mihem halalu. Amar lo zohi ishti shenasati b'Midyan. This is my wife. Ve'elu banai. Amar lo. So Aaron told Moshe Rabbeinu, ve'echan ata molichan. So where are you taking them? Amar lo leMitzrayim. Amar lo. So Aaron said to him, al harishonim anu mitzta'arim, on things that happened in the past. We are unhappy. V'ata bo lo sifa lehem, and you're going to add to them the trouble. Amar la lechi el beit avich. He said to her, Aaron said to her, lechi el beit avich, netala shnei baneha, netala shnei baneha, v'halchala. She took her 2 sons, and she went. V'halchala. I think what Rashi is trying to explain, that there was a change in the perception of Tzipora. She was at the beginning seen as something extra, something unnecessary. Why did why did Moshe Rabbeinu need a wife from Midian? Why is the person who's going to change the history of the world need a wife who might seem to be irrelevant? But in this pasuk, it says that it was a char shilucheha. Char shilucheha means she was sent away. When was she sent away? So Rashi quotes the way the Medrash tells the story, that it was Aaron who said, what are you adding people who might not be able to understand? But then by the time the Yitro came with Tzipporah, everybody understood that she was Eshet Moshe, that she wasn't just a woman that had been found by Moshe in a well, but she was somebody, a special kind of person. ושני בניה אשר שתיהם אחד גרשום, כי אמר גר הייתי בארץ נוכריה, ושם האחד אליעזר, כי אלוהי אבי בעזרי, ויצילני מחרב פרעה. So the children were also important. I mean, they get special mention here in the parasha. They have names that reflect the history of Moshe Rabbeinu, the fact that he was able to uncover the truth about what was going on. Vayavo Yitro chotein Moshe. Vayavo, pasuk Dalet. Vayavo Yitro chotein Moshe. Again chotein Moshe. Again chotein Moshe means his connection. Again, it's the emphasis on the connection to Moshe Rabbeinu. ובניו ואשתו אל משה אל המדבר אשר הוא חונה שם, הר האלוקים. So he came to Moshe Har Elokim. Okay, Har Elokim is a special place, the place where the Torah would be given. He specifically arranged it that that's when he should come. He should be part of that process. Vayomer el Moshe. So then all of these psukim, right, 1 and 2 and 3, these psukim are all about Yitro, about the decision of Yitro. When he finally arrives at the camp of Israel, Vayomer el Moshe, Ani chotencha Yisro ba'elecha, which means Yitro said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ani chotencha, meaning I'm announcing, we didn't have this relationship when you were in Midian. We didn't know each other on this level, but he says, Ani chotencha Yitro. I am really with you. I am a relative. I'm related to you. It's not just that you married my daughter, but you and I have a special relationship. Ba'elecha ve'ish techo shnei baneha ima. Ibaneha ima. We are all one family. We are all family. And this is a very important note that Yitro makes, because the problem with being part of the family was what drove Yitro ultimately away. But Vayetze Moshe Likrat Choteno, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is giving honor to his father-in-law. He goes out to greet him. Vayishtachu, Vayishaklo, Vayishalo ish l're'eu l'shalom. Vayavo ha'ohela. Vayavo ha'ohela, meaning they went for private consultation. They went to talk to each other about what was going on. Okay. 1 or 2 more psukim. Ha'ohela, pasuk chet. Vayesaper Moshe. זה משה לחותנו את כל אשר עשה השם לפרעה ולמצרים, על אודות ישראל את כל התלאה אשר מצאתם בדרך, Vayatzilem Hashem. So Yitro is getting the inside story. Yitro went from the level of Vayishma Yitro, where he understood things, big things happened. It wasn't that they were just big, but they were final. There were things that happened with finality. The Egyptians were all dead. The Amalekites, ones were beaten down, and even though the war was not definitively ended, but it was the beginning of the change of Am Yisrael, who was able to fight a battle. Yitro kol hatovah asher asa Hashem leYisrael asher hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim vayichad Yitro. You remember that word vayichad? Yeah. Rashi says, kol hatla'a vayichad Yitro. Here it is. Pasuk tet vayichad Yitro Yud Chet Daled. Rashi says, vayismach Yitro. You know, vayismach is a word that's used for doing a mitzvah. It's a necessary ingredient in doing the mitzvah, and it's a reflection of the feeling that you have when everything is as it should be. Right? It makes you happy, not the happiness of silliness, not the happiness of foolishness. That the Rambam calls that holalut. Holalut is unacceptable. But simcha is absolutely necessary. Simcha is an aspect of a mitzvah. You can't do the mitzvah properly unless you do it with simcha, because simcha is what you feel when you know that everything is in its proper place. That's why it's easiest for us with simchat chatan v'kala. Right? You know, chatan v'kala, they're usually happy. And the happiness that they have is because they're in the right place. They found a place for themselves. So Vayismach Yitro means he was happy. What was he happy about? The greater insight that Moshe Rabbeinu gave him. That was what he was happy about. Vayismach Yitro, Rashi says in this classic Rashi, Zeu Pshuta. That's, if you want to know what the pasuk is saying. Vayichad Yitro, Chedva. Chedva. There's such a word in Hebrew. Umedrasho. But in this case, the secondary meaning, right? The non-pshat meaning, but the correct meaning as well. There are two correct meanings. Naaseh b'saro chidudin. He felt it on his skin. You know, he felt his feeling, the simcha. It was on him. Chidudin, meitzar al Evud Mitzrayim. Hainu da Amar Inish Giyura Adasara Dare Lo Tivaze Aramid Ba'apei. So according to Rashi, Yitro was happy and unhappy. He was happy because he had heard what he had heard from Moshe Rabbeinu about Yitziat Mitzrayim, but he was unhappy that the Egyptians were not able to understand what was happening to them, and they were all destroyed. And that's what often the case. It's often the case that we are confronted by the necessity to react in two opposite ways. There are things that could make us happy, but at the same time, we realize that there was a tremendous investment of our energy and our being in whatever was going on, and it makes us sad. So Yitro was the author of Azorim b'dima, b'rina yikzoru, that there's dima that leads to rina. Sometimes there is such a thing, and we don't have to be we don't have to feel the lack of simcha, because there are aspects of what is going on that are difficult for us to understand and difficult for us to come into contact with. So that's why Yichad Yisro. He taught us something, even to us something. Pasuk Tedvav, Vayichad Yitro im kol hatova, asher asa Hashem lYisrael. So Rashi says the pshat is Yitro is happy, and we added that happiness is an integral part of Kiyum HaMitzvah. Asher hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim. Hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim, mentioning Mitzrayim at the time of great simcha is something that Yitro taught us, that you could have at the same time al kol hatova, you could be thankful for all the goodness at the same time Asher hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim, that it saddened Yitro that the Mitzrim were not able to understand what was really happening to them. By Shema Yitro, Kol HaTova Asher Asa Hashem LeYisrael Asher Hitzilo Miyad Mitzrayim, Pasuk Yud, last Pasuk which I put on the sheet. Vayomer Yitro, Baruch Hashem Asher Hitzil Etchem Miyad Mitzrayim. So here is Yitro. Yitro says, Asher hitzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim, right? Baruch Hashem. Omer, Uma kasha, umiyad paro, melech kasha, mitachet yad Mitzrayim, kitargumo l'shon ridu, umarut hayad, shayu bechbidim aleichem hi ha'avodah. So we see that Yitro was Baruch Hashem, Yitro said. I mean, he didn't say it. He's the first person who said it. You see that Rashi, Vayichad Yitro Pasuk Tet, Al Kol HaTov, Kol HaTov, Tovat Haman, V'Abe'er, V'HaTorah. He knew about Kol HaTov. Yitro, knew about Kol HaTov. And he could call it as a man that's food to eat. Be'er is something to drink. V'HaTorah. This all Yitro understood from the words of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'al kulan asher hitzilo b'yad Mitzrayim. Ad achshav lo haya eved yachol livroach miMitzrayim shaya aretz mitzugar. What is it that Yitro is amazed about? I mean, Mitzrayim was the place that no slave had ever escaped from. Shayta aretz mitzugar, it was surrounded by fences and walls, and you couldn't get out. Ve'elu yatzu shishim ribo, and these is Jews, Bnei Yaakov, yatzu shishim ribo, 600,000 of them. 600,000 of them went out. So he understood that it was Yad Chazakah, that what God did, no other pretenses of God could do. Mitachad Yad Mitzrayim. So we see that Yitro was a character worthy of note. But what is the character of Yitro? In what way is he connected? I mean, this last Rashi, which seems to imply that Yitro understood something about Talmud Torah, which reminds us of the fact that Rashi doesn't mention, but the Ramban goes into it at great length, that there's a machloket in the Gemara in Zebachim at the end about whether Yitro came before Matan Torah or after Matan Torah. It's reasonable for me to say, let's take Yitro as being the one who came before Matan Torah, which is the way the Torah itself says it. I mean, I know that Rashi, of course, is the opinion that Ein Mukta Mu'char B'Torah, that you don't have to follow necessarily, you don't have to follow chronology when telling the stories in the Torah, and certainly this is true in the case of Matan Torah for some reason. But we don't have to follow the chronology. But we can follow the chronology. The Ramban seems to say that the chronology is the pshat, that Yitro came before Matan Torah, and he came before Matan Torah because he understood things by Yishma Yitro, and then the Moshe Rabbeinu added on. The Rabbi said somebody understands, somebody can tell him more. He can give him greater understanding, and that's what Moshe Rabbeinu gave to Yitro. That's what Yitro was able to understand about his relationship to Moshe Rabbeinu and his understanding of what Matan Torah is all about. But it seems that Yitro may have had another job in the world, and that job may be reflected in the fact, that the first Rashi, which we skipped, the first Rashi in Vayishma Yitro says this: Sheva Shemot Nikreulo. So I don't want to go through all the names that Rashi quotes, but they had 7 names. What do you mean he had 7 names? I mean, is that important for us to know? 7 names, your names are culturally and ordained. Like you say, you hear somebody's name, you know where they come from. You know what nation they belong to. Because every nation is careful about its own names and doesn't like to share them with other people. So if I say that Yitro had 7 names, what I'm also saying is he was really a man of the world. He had existence in 7 places. He had people who called him by the different names that he had in that time, and because of that, he was a kind of a universal representative. He wasn't coming to get the Torah on his own. He was coming to get the Torah for the people of the world. The people, now, what do the people of the world have to do with the Torah? I know there's Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, but I mean the Torah which includes the goodness that is available to people. We can't always claim that's the way it works. So the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Malachim talks about the Mashiach, and he says, Im Yamod Melech mi Beit David. Here I'm reading. Melech mi Beit David, Ogeva Torah, Osek b'mitzvot, ki David Aviv. If you have a descendant of David HaMelech, that descendant of David HaMelech is available. We know about him. Kafi Torah shebichtav v'shebal peh, v'yechavein kol Yisrael elech ba, v'lechazek ולחזק בדקה V'yilachem milchemat Hashem, harei zeh b'cheskat, shehu Mashiach. So the Rambam seems to think that the Mashiach is a noteworthy personality, and we'll be able to know who that is. He'll have to bring political peace into the world. ובנה מקדש במקומו וקיבץ נדחי ישראל, הרי זה משיח ודאי. ואם לא הצליח עד כה, או נהרג, בידעו שאינו זה שהבטיחה עליו תורה, והרי הוא ככל מלכי בית דוד השלמים. If he dies in doing this episode, we know he's not the Mashiach. Right? like שיר שמתו, ולא העמידו הקדוש ברוך הוא אלא לעשות בו רבים, שנאמר, ומן המשכילים ייכשלו לצרון בהן ולברר וללבן על עת קץ כי עוד למועד. And then he goes on and makes this a fantastic statement, which I would like to just share at this time. Yeshua Notzri, that's the one who is called Jesus. Yeshua Notzri Shedama Sheyem Mashiach. He thought he was the Mashiach. V'nachu v'neherag b'beit din var nitnabei bo Daniel, etc. And then at the end, he also talks about Muhammad. So in other words, according to the Rambam, the great religions that are derivative of Judaism, like Christianity and Islam, are sort of preparations for Yemot HaMashiach. I mean, the Mashiach is going to come, and the Mashiach is going to say, okay, he's the Mashiach. So there's got to be some way for the Mashiach to be accepted in the world, not just the Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael, under the leadership of the Mashiach, will be obliged to keep the Torah and the mitzvot. But the non-Jews are not obliged to keep the Torah and the mitzvot, except for the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. But the non-Jews are part of the idea. They understand that there is something special about the Messianic era. There's something special about Am Yisrael. There's something special about the people who keep the mitzvot as opposed to the people who don't keep the mitzvot. And that's what the Rambam seems to be implying here, that what's going to happen, the Mashiach is going to come, will be a small nation of Jews. What are we going to go and try to convert all the people in India and in China? I mean, we won't be able to do it. Oh, he says, we don't have to do it. It's a question of respect. It's a question of how they look at us and what will be at the time of the Mashiach. So the Rambam doesn't say it, but it seems to me reasonable to say, or possible to say, that Yitro represents the spark that exists within the world, the people of the world who are able to accept the idea that the Torah is very important and it's part of the makeup of Am Yisrael. And that's why you could say that the naming of the Parsha of Yitro is very accurate, because Yitro represents the people of the world who understood enough for there to be a Mashiach, a Messiah coming into the world, which Bnei Yisrael are the leading contenders in that department. And so Yitro did something about the Torah, which enabled all the people of the world to be part of the process, which leads to political peace and salvation, and doing the mitzvot, as Yitro pointed out, besimcha and with seriousness. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.